homesteaded in 1875. At one time they had about 640 acres under sprinkler irrigation with water pumped from a well by big diesel engines, and farmed most of it with a Model 830 John Deere tractor. I worked for Wendell many nights while in high school in 1963 and 64, plowing with that Model 830 John Deere tractor in Banks Valley with a 5-bottom drag behind plow. That tractor had a cab on it, so nighttime plowing was not all that bad. I remember as a boy going trick-or-treating to Uncle Orlando and Aunt Anna's home. Uncle Orlando would have the group come in, and one at a time he would dump each sack of goodies out on the table and select that which he liked and put the rest back. After he had inspected each bag in the group, selecting something from each bag, he would ask Aunt Anna to put extra of whatever they were giving in each bag to compensate for that which he had taken. Sometimes we would be there for a half hour. I think on it differently now than I did as a boy. Uncle Orlando died in 1970 at age 77. He had a stack of posts in the yard that he had spent a part of the day peeling the bark off the bottom end of with a draw knife so he could treat them in his treat barrels before building fence with them. He went in the house and washed up and sat in his recliner and died from a heart attack. Although 9 years his younger, Aunt Anna did not deal well with his death, as from that day on she seemed to lose her enthusiasm for life. Aunt Anna died just 3 years later at age 71. When Robert and Carl Schmid stopped at Dave's Dairy in Williamsburg in September of 1884, Aunt Sophia was pregnant with her 4th child and 3rd son, who was born November 23, 1894, was named Guy. Sophia, Guy's mother, wrote of Guy's birth in her handwritten birth record, Guy Kunz, born the 23rd of November, 1894, blessed the 24th of December, 1894, by Henry Fusser. I'm sure that would have been Henry Tusher, a close family friend. Died the 26th of December, 1894. Sophia Rebecca, Guy's older sister, wrote in her history that when Guy was born they were living in the bottoms below Paris on what was called the island. She writes that Guy was buried on Cemetery Hill in Bern. There is a marker for Guy by David and Sophia's markers in the Bern Cemetery today. Being December 1894, Guy would actually be the first burial in the Bern Cemetery. Even though the family was living on the island below Paris, feeding cattle for the winter, Guy was born in Bern as Sophia was in Bern for the birth, so she would have the needed help. Guy only lived for 1 month and 3 days and died in infancy. Just 1 month after that, Aunt Lou gave birth to Leroy Nicholas Kunz on the 25th of December, 1894. Nick, as he was called, spent most of his early life in Bern and worked as a farm laborer for Orlando and Parley and Tony and most anybody that needed help. Nick never married and never owned a home in Bern. Calvin Bueller, Nick's nephew, remembers that for a number of years Nick owned a donkey jack, and he would let people breed to his jack so that they could get mules. For years while in Bern, Nick lived in a small rectangular weather-tight structure that looked like an enclosed box built as an enclosed bed for a truck, which he had converted into something resembling an early version of a camper. It was about 12 feet long and 8 feet wide. For years this small makeshift home was located up by David and Lou's home, which became Uncle Orlando and Aunt Anna's home. Then for several years it was located north of Aunt Sophia's home. Across the south block of Bern, running north and south, there was an alley, the east 5 lots and the west 5 lots, giving those property owners access to the inside ends of their lots. The alley was fenced but was not really improved. All the lot owners used the alley for access, and nobody claimed it nor tried to prevent another's access. Then for several years Nick's makeshift home was moved for some reason to that alley so as not to obstruct anybody getting past. While Nick was in the alley, which ran across the end of Bishop Schmidt's property and also across the end of my father's property next door, he spent a lot of time giving service to Robert Schmidt, turning his hand-powered sausage and lard grinder. Nick suffered with alcoholism for many years of his life. Nobody bothered Nick, and Nick never bothered anybody. Nick finally moved to the Salt Lake Valley near the Tooele area and worked on a horse ranch for most of the remainder of his life. Then on May 6, 1896, Aunt Sophia gave birth to her 4th son and 5th child in Bern. He was named Ira Clarence Kunz, and he lived to be 16 and a half years old when he died on December 3, 1912. In the latter part of the month of November, Ira Clarence contracted pneumonia and passed on December 3rd. Ira Clarence would have been one of the many of David's children that started school in the school church building that David built in Lower Bern on Church House Hill, and received much of their schooling there with John T. Rigby as the teacher. Heber Kuntz says that for a number of years that building was divided into 2 classrooms by a curtain, with the older classes on one side and the younger classes on the other. Heber says that most of the time it was very noisy. On August 20th, 1896, Aunt Lou added another son to the family. Fayette Francis was born in Bern. Fayette was Aunt Lou's 9th child and 7th son. Fayette grew up in Bern, helping on David's farm and learning to work and going to school in both the church school building while it was in Lower Bern, and in that same building when it was moved to the Bern town site. Fayette probably spent several years attending school in the old gym right after it was built, and spent some time attending the Fielding Academy. Fayette left Bern early in life and went to seek his fortune in California, a land of opportunity and moderate climate. Fayette became renowned in the construction business with a reputation for excellent plastering. He did very well financially in that profession. He was in Los Angeles in 1930, where he, at age 34, met and married Melba Boyce. To that union was born 4 children. Fay and his family visited Bern quite regularly over the years. Montaigne Kuntz, Delmer and Wanda's son, remembers Fay's oldest son, Monty, quite well. I have met Monty's oldest daughter, Kimberly Ann. I find her to be quite charming and most pleasant. Most of Fayette and Melba's posterity have remained in California. Then on January 7, 1898, Aunt Sophia added another son, her 6th child and 4th son to the family. Ulysses Seymour was born and raised in Bern. Seymour was 10 years old when his mother died. His sister Rebecca was his acting mother for the next 9 years. He later, on the 4th of June 1919, married Maud Pecora from Georgetown in Salt Lake City, Utah. Their first son, also named Ulysses Seymour, was born and died on February 27, 1920 in Georgetown, Idaho. Sometime after that, Ulysses Seymour and Maud also moved to California. They adopted a daughter, Linda Sue, born the 18th of March, 1949, in Altadena, California. The family was still in California in 1968 as Seymour died in Montrova, California. Ulysses and Maud only had the 2 children. Then Aunt Lou added another daughter to the family by giving birth to Iris Grace on July 9, 1899 in Bern. At 20 years of age, Iris, on the 28th of May 1919, married Jesse Joseph Bueller in Logan, Utah, giving David his 3rd Bueller son-in-law. Iris and Jesse's first 2 children were born in Bern, indicating the family lived in Bern until sometime after 1922, when they moved to the Salt Lake City area. Their 3rd child was born in Salt Lake City, with the family finally settling in Midvale, Utah, as the last 2 children were born in Midvale. Iris was widowed April 26, 1947, with the passing of Jesse Joseph. Iris lived another 41 years single, so she was required to finish raising her 6 children alone. As a single parent, Iris took a job with the railroad. She was responsible for cleaning certain types of railroad cars. One day a switching crew ran into a car she was cleaning, knocking her off balance and knocking her out. In the process, the car ran over her leg, amputating her leg above the knee. Iris worked and raised her family using a wood leg sometimes, and sometimes on crutches. Iris also worked for a period for the city of Murray, or the county, before she finally died the 1st of January 1988 in Murray, Utah. Aunt Sophia added another boy to the family with the birth of Russell Lester, born November 1st, 1899 in Bern. Russell was raised in Bern and worked with his father David on the farm and in his dairy. Later, at age 20, on the 9th of July, Russell married Clara Hoff of Georgetown, Idaho, in Salt Lake City. Russell and Clara had their first son in 1920 in Wardboro, Idaho. They had a second son in Bern in 1922, so the family was in Bear Lake for several years after their marriage. Then sometime between 1922 and 1934, the family moved to Boise, Idaho, as their 3rd child, a girl, was born in Boise in 1934. The family was still in Boise in 1935 and 36, as their 4th child was born in Boise. Then the family moved to Salt Lake City, as their 5th child was born in 1937 in Salt Lake City, and the 6th child, born in 1939, was also born in Salt Lake City. There were 6 children born to this union. Russell Lester died on January 21, 1969. Clara Hoff Kunz died January 23, 1992, at age 94 in Salt Lake City. The record shows that in late 1949 or early 1950, as no actual date is recorded, Russell Lester married a second wife, Ruth Sturm. The record shows 7 children were born to this union. The family resided in or close to Murray, Utah, as all 7 of the children were born in Murray, Utah. Ruth was widowed on January 21, 1969, and was remarried the 20th of February 1969 at 35 years of age to Morris Quincy Kunz, Russell's younger brother. Ruth and Morris had 2 children. On October 28, 1901, Aunt Sophia added another girl to the family with the birth of Kate Kunz in Bern. Kate grew up and attended school in Bern till the 8th grade, then high school at Fielding Academy. Kate was 7 years old when she lost her mother to death, and her sister Rebecca at 16 became her proxy mother. At 18 years of age, Kate married Walter Bueller in Salt Lake City on the 2nd of July, 1919. Walt was David's 4th Bueller son-in-law from the Christian Bueller Sr. family. Walt and Kate lived in a home on the Lower Bern Road, about a block north of the house Elmer and Helen Bueller lived in. Elmer and Helen lived in the house which was the original Christian Bueller Sr. home, and they ranched for a number of years in Bear Lake and raised a family of 2 children. They lived at the bottom of what was known as Wildcat Grove along the Lower Bern Road. They then moved to Upper Bern into the house that Ben Kunz, Johnny's son, built, that is the house that Leland and Renee lived in, and raised their family. Walt and Kate then moved to the Salt Lake City area for a number of years and finally ended up in St. George. As a boy, I remember one occasion where my brothers and I had interaction with Charlie, Walt and Kate's oldest son. I was bringing the cows up from the pasture to the barn one morning about 5 a.m. To get from the pasture to the barn required I and the cows cross the US 89 River Bridge, which was west of Montpelier, Idaho. As I crossed the bridge, I was looking south down the river. I noticed a car parked in the middle of the river with both doors open. It was in the fall of the year and the river was low, so the water was running across the floorboards, but most of the front seat was still exposed. When I got to the barn, I told my older brothers that there was a car parked in the middle of the river about 300 yards down from the bridge. It took some convincing before they would believe me, but they finally did, and we went down through the south field to look. On the way to the river, we noticed a section of the fence laid down along the highway and tracks through the alfalfa. When we reached the river, we found a young man lying on the front seat of the car. My brothers knew him and identified him as Charlie Bueller. Apparently, Charlie had left the highway sometime during the night and went through the fence and through the hayfield and ended up in the middle of Bear River. Apparently it did not concern him much, as after he opened the doors and saw his situation, he just laid out on the seat and slept until we woke him. We went back to the barn and got Father's International TD6 crawler and went to the river and pulled Charlie's car out of the river, and the last we saw him, he was once again going down the highway. David and Aunt Lou's 11th child and last son joined the family July 18, 1902, when Oliver Kunz was born in Bern. Robert Kunz records in his journal that when he and his family were living in Alton, Uncle David and Aunt Lou's family were living at the Lewis Ranch in Raymond. Robert gives no reason for their being there, but I assume it was because David had a contract for work. Robert says that Oliver was taken seriously ill. David was in Bern at the time with Aunt Sophia and her family. Oliver had taken many convulsions. 2 of Oliver's brothers had mounted horses in the night and gone for help, one riding to Robert's home and the other riding to Montpelier for the doctor. Robert was reached first, and he rode to the Lewis Ranch as fast as his horse could carry him. Robert first administered to Oliver, then prayed for inspiration as to what to do for the young lad until the doctor arrived. After that, Robert suggested to Aunt Lou that they put Oliver in a tub of warm water, submersing his whole body, and then put cold packs on his head, which they did. The convulsions stopped immediately. When Dr. Hoover arrived, he told Robert that he had saved the boy's life and that he had done exactly what the doctor would have done. Oliver grew up mostly in Bern and later married LaVon Chapman August 18, 1927. The 1940 census shows Oliver and LaVon living at Roberts, Idaho, where they had lived for the past 5 years, where he was the principal of a grade school. Oliver died the 13th of January 1953 at 51 years of age. On the 13th of November 1904, Aunt Sophia added another son to the family. Morris Quincy was her 6th son and 9th child. Morris was only 4 years old when his mother died. In his history, he remembered her dying, and he tells how much he was impacted by the deaths of his mother, 2 older brothers, and 1 younger sister, all within 10 years. Morris recalls a fond memory of his youth when he and his father took a team and a sleigh to the Paris Tabernacle and attended both sessions of a stake conference where President Joseph F. Smith presided. Morris tells of he and Ulysses taking 2 teams and 2 wagons in October and going to Mink Creek for 2 loads of fruit for the people of Bern. It was a distance of 30 miles. He said they spent 2 days loading the wagons. The west side of Immigration Canyon was so steep and the wagons loaded so heavy that they had to hook both teams to each wagon and rest the horses frequently to get to the top. It took them the first day just to reach the summit. Both boys spent a cold night on the summit before starting for home in the morning about 15 miles. They arrived home about 9:30 p.m. and then spent hours unloading the wagons so the fruit wouldn't freeze. Morris told Ulysses he would never make another trip for fruit with a team and wagon, and he never did. Morris finished district school in 1918 and went to Paris to the Fielding Academy in 1919 for a year of high school. Morris then went to Boise, Idaho for a time with his brother Ulysses and his wife Maud Pecoria and her family. Morris then caught a train and came back to Bern, where he moved in with David J. and Emma. During 1921, Morris worked for Lee Salek, building the red brick school in Bern for $3 per day. Then he worked for David C. Kunz, herding sheep as the camp tender at China Hat, north of Soda Springs. Morris said the 4 on that job were Frank Kuntz, Alberto Bateman, August Schmid, and himself. While still in Bern, Morris went to work for the Pacific Fruit Express Company, icing fruit cars used for shipping fruit from Washington to the East Coast markets. In September of 1922, Morris, at age 18, received a mission call for the Central States Mission. Horace Kuntz, Morris's nephew, received his call to serve in the Swiss-German mission at the same time. Morris wanted to serve with Horace, so he wrote President Heber J. Grant and asked to have his assignment changed. That was granted, and he and Horace went to the Salt Lake City and were set apart, and both were ordained 70s. They then traveled to Germany and Switzerland, where they served honorably for their 2 years. Morris was suffering with homesickness, and in answer to his prayer, he had a dream that he went home. He felt terrible about the reception he received from his sister Rebecca. Her disappointment was so upsetting to Morris that he was glad when he awoke and found that he was still in Switzerland. He never had a homesick day after that. Morris filled an honorable mission and returned in 1924. On the 31st of March, 1927, 3 years after his return from his mission, Morris married Rhea Allred at Salt Lake City, Utah. He and Rhea's first child was born in Salt Lake City in 1928, and the second was born in Montpelier, Idaho in 1929. Sometime between 1929 and 1931, Morris and Rhea moved to Boise, Idaho, because their third child was born April 10, 1931 in Boise. Then, contrary to the laws of the land, and contrary to the manifesto published by President Wilford Woodruff of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, on October 6, 1890, Morris Quincy married on July 3, 1931, Olive Allred, Rhea's sister, at Boise, Idaho. Morris and Rhea had 8 children, 3 born before Morris's second marriage and 5 after. Morris and Olive had 6 children. Olive's first child was born in July of 1932 in Boise, Idaho, and Rhea's fourth child was born in August of 1932, also in Boise, Idaho. Then apparently the families moved back to the Salt Lake City area as the succeeding children were being born in Salt Lake City or the surrounding area. Morris also married Ellen May Halliday in Salt Lake City on December 24, 1933. Morris and Ellen May had 11 children between them. Morris married again on July 16, 1935 to Rachel Averda Jessup. Morris and Rachel had 5 children between them. So strong were Morris's feelings about the eternal law of plural marriage that he and 14 other fundamental Mormons spent 2 years in the Utah State Prison rather than signing a statement disavowing the principle. After being convicted in 1944 and entering prison in 1945. According to Time magazine, Morris Q. Kunz, 66, has 3 wives living in adjacent homes in a Salt Lake City suburb. He indicates that he intends to continue practicing the principle to the fullest. Says Morris, "I have 3 wives, 30 children, 8 stepchildren, more than 200 grandchildren, 6 great-grandchildren, and I ain't dead yet." On March 7, 1960, Morris, at age 56, married Margaret Caroline Mills, 2 years his younger. They had no children. Then Morris married Lester's widow, Ruth Sturm, on February 20th, 1969, and they had 2 children between them. Between all of his families, Morris had 31 children. According to Uncle Phil's book, Rhea and Morris were finally divorced. No date was given. Calvin Bueller remembered Morris as a happy and pleasant man. Morris Quincy Kunz died June 26, 1991, and was buried in the Elyson Burial Gardens, Mill Creek, Salt Lake City, Utah. On the 5th of November 1906, Aunt Sophia added her 10th child to the family, a daughter named Marcella. Marcella is mentioned by Morris in his history as he tells of his memorable experiences and enjoyable relationship he had with her when they were both young. Marcella died of a ruptured appendix when she was 13 years old. Then, with the birth of Reed Walder on July 15, 1908, Aunt Sophia added the last boy and last child to be added to David's family. Then, when Reed was only 4 months old, on December 1st, 1908, Aunt Sophia, David's second wife, died from a ruptured appendix. The doctor had been summoned to the home. Aunt Sophia was put out and she was operated on, but to no avail. It was too late. She never came out from under the anesthesia. Robert Smith said of Aunt Sophia in his journal, Aunt Sophia Nielsen Kunz, wife of David Kunz, died December 1st, 1908. A faithful Latter-day Saint, Aunt Sophia, and Sophie, as she was familiarly known, was a wonderfully fine person. David had Aunt Sophia's family move in with Aunt Lou and her family for the rest of the winter. The conditions were crowded, and by spring, Sophia Rebecca, at 16, talked her father into letting her take Sophia's family back home, and she would take care of them, which she did for the next 9 years. David allowed her to do so except for Reed, who remained and was raised in Aunt Lou's home. Reed often commented that he felt like an orphan growing up. Reed was only 8 years old when his father, David, died from stomach cancer. Morris was 12 and Marcella was 10. David was sick for about a year with stomach cancer. He was aware of his situation. In putting his affairs in order, Reed and Morris